On to chapter 14, firms and competitive markets. We are nearly done with this term. This chapter, we'll get into monopolies, and then if we have a chance, we'll continue and cover additional material. But chapter 14, firms in competitive markets. So what are we covering? We'll talk about competitive markets. By the way, if I say competitive markets or perfectly competitive, they basically mean the same thing. Remember in chapter 4, we talked a bit about them. We made the assumption that markets were competitive, so I'll remind you about what we mean by that here in this chapter. We'll talk about marginal revenue, which you kind of already should have an idea of what that means. Marginal revenue, right? Additional revenue. Money's coming in, so the additional money coming in from what? From selling something, right? You sell an additional pin, what's the money coming in? You sell an additional sandwich, what's the money coming in? So again, marginal revenue. And we'll relate that to total and average revenue. I'll tell you right now that I don't really care too much about average revenue. It's not super interesting. We'll see it here, but I'm like, who cares? How does a competitive firm determine the quantity that maximizes profits? So we are going to make the same assumption we've been making all along, that firms want to maximize profits. And given this objective, how do they determine what the sweet quantity is, that optimal quantity, that quantity that achieves its objective of profit maximization? And then we'll cover a few different cases of the competitive firm. So don't confuse the firm with the market. But we'll talk about different cases of the competitive firm, when it makes sense to operate, when is it breaking even, under what conditions should it operate or shut down or close its doors, or does it ever make sense to potentially produce when it's losing money? You're actually going to see that sometimes it makes sense for a firm to continue to produce even though it is losing money. So we'll make sense of that. Right now it may seem counterintuitive, but by the time you're done with this chapter, it'll make a whole lot of sense. In fact, since you've already read the chapter, it probably already makes some sense to you, and we'll make sure we just crystallize that for you. Okay, and lastly, what does the market supply curve look like in the short run and in the long run? So here we go. We're actually going to start off by setting up a simple little scenario. Actually, before we get into this scenario, I'm going to go to the whiteboard because I want to describe to you the different degrees of competition. So let me introduce you to the different degrees of market power. This is what I call the continuum of market power, meaning we have a continuum of different degrees of it. This is also known as the organization of industry, or also known as industrial organization, IO. It is a sub field or a sub-discipline in economics. Some people devote their lives to studying the organization of industry. In other words, to studying industrial organization. And so again, go back to how I started this statement. I said, let's talk about the degrees of market power. So by market power, we mean the ability to influence price, a firm's ability to influence price. Or maybe not even a firm, a buyer. But we're going to focus, by the way, on supply side. Notice that in chapter 13, when we were talking about the costs of production, that's all supply side. When we're talking about competitive firms, that's supply side. A monopoly, that is supply side. So basically, we're on the supply side of things right now. So let's talk about the two different extremes. On one extreme, so again, this is a continuum. On one extreme, say on the left here, we're going to say that there's no market power at all. So a firm has no influence on price. It does not have the ability to influence price. At the other end, we have what we call absolute market power. The highest degree of market power, meaning you get to set the price. And so if I asked you, hey, where does the monopolist go? Well, you're going to say it goes here. So that's exactly what we're going to write here. This little knob there is going to represent the monopoly. And then at the extreme on the left, no market power at all, is where we have perfect competition, also known as competitive firms. Competitive. Okay. And so the one on the right is chapter 15. The one on the left is chapter 14. And in between the two, we have something that's closer to this end. And we call it monopolistically competitive. So monopolistic competition resides here. So it's a little closer to competitive markets, but it's a little different. And then here we have what we call an oligopoly. And so we're going to characterize these different types of industries. So industry, once again, is supply side. It happens to be the case that monopolistic competition is chapter 16, a chapter that I hardly ever get to cover in a micro class. And then oligopoly, chapter 17, which I typically try to cover. Sometimes I don't get to it, but it's okay. My goal is always to, at minimum, cover the two extremes. Why? Is because that's where the main story is. Once we understand the two extremes, the stuff in the middle makes so much sense. Okay, so we're going to focus on chapter 14 and chapter 15, and here, obviously, chapter 14. So let's characterize highly, highly, highly competitive industries. And so an example of that in terms of a firm or an industry would be something like wheat. Wheat is highly competitive, both on the supply side and on the demand side. But again, we're focusing on the supply side. Why did I use wheat? It's because think of all the farmers that are out there. There are so many farmers out there harvesting wheat, so many of them that it doesn't even make sense to try to identify your rivals if you're a farmer, right? So the characteristics of perfectly competitive industries, as we already know, we have many buyers and sellers. What else? They have basically identical or nearly identical products. This is what we call homogeneous or homogeneous products. Also known as standardized product. What else? There are no barriers to entry. It is not difficult to enter this industry or to leave for that matter. So entry or exit. Okay. And then because of these conditions, we have price-taking behavior. They end up being price takers, meaning they have no market power, right? They have no influence on price. Okay, so highly, highly competitive industries. We've already talked about those in chapter 4 when I first introduced you to supply and demand. Now let's go to the other extreme, right, where we have absolute market power, the highest concentration of market power. The greatest ability for a firm to influence price. Let me just shrink this a little so I can fit all my stuff in here. Let me do that too. So the monopoly resides there. And what are the conditions for there to be a monopoly? So let me zoom in on that. We have one seller, obviously. There's no identical or unidentical product because there's only one seller. And the reason there's only one seller is that there's something keeping other firms out. So there's a barrier or barriers to entry. Whether that barrier is control of a natural resource that's necessary to produce whatever they're producing, like diamonds. For example, in the 1980s, we had De Beers. I'll spell that. De Beers. De Beers owned most of the world's mines. They didn't own all of them. Not mines, diamond mines. They didn't own all of them, but they owned nearly all of them. So they practically had a full monopoly on diamonds. Eventually, it split itself up and sold itself into pieces because of some issues, but it was a monopoly. So there are barriers to entry, and then so entry is not free, right? It's not easy to enter. There could be the control of a natural resource. It could be that you have most of the market share. That's possible. Like if a firm comes in to compete with me when I have most of the world's market share, good luck. What else? It could be that maybe if I'm the monopolist, I have a patent or a permit that legally I'm the only one that's able to produce this good or the service. Maybe I'm the only one. It makes sense for there only to be one firm in in this market. Why? Because I have what is known as a natural monopoly. It naturally makes sense for there to only be one firm, and not naturally as in coming from the earth and it's green and it, is powered by the sun. Not that kind of natural. In economics, naturally, it makes sense for there only to be one. So, for example, let's say you have, a town with a bunch of residents. Oh my God, I should not be drawing. Oh goodness, this was a mistake. So we have, a bunch of homes. Yeah, big mistake. I shouldn't be drawing. That's why I'm an economist. And, there's one provider of, for example, cable. Utility companies tend to be natural monopolies. Why? Because, say, a cable company or an electricity company, say a cable company, they set up their network, underground. I obviously don't know what cable networks, what they look like, but I'm just drawing a network because I don't know what I'm doing. So they set up their network underground, and I should stop, right? And, it gets to the homes, whatever. And if another firm comes, let's say this is Cox Cable, another firm comes to compete, it's not like Cox Cable is going to say, yeah, I'll share my network. Here you go, other competitor. I'll share it with you. No. If that other firm is going to come to compete, they have to incur the cost of setting up their own network, right? So that they can provide the service to the households, whatever. I'm just trying to copy this. Right, so that they can provide the services to the households. So it doesn't make sense for them to even come in, because even just to service one household, Company Red, Cox, I did Cox in red. I probably should have done them in blue since their logo's in blue, but whatever. Cox is not going to allow some other competitor to use their network, right? This other competitor is going to have to set up their own network just to service one home. So they have this enormous upfront cost just to be able to compete on the provision of the service to one home. It doesn't make sense for there to be two, right? So you can think of it that way because of this huge upfront fixed costs. Or you can also think of it in the sense of, look at how inefficient it is. We didn't need two networks down there. The best way to think of it, though, is that huge upfront fixed cost that second firm would have to incur in order to compete with Cox Cable. So utilities tend to be natural monopolies. In fact, that's a good example of a monopoly. Utility companies. De Beers back in the day. What else? Pure monopolies are hard to come by, but these are some good examples, these two here. All right, so we have one seller, there are barriers to entry, and because of this, they are basically, or it, the firm, is a price setter. It determines the price. But ask yourself, can it set the price at infinity? Why aren't we paying infinity or $10 bazillion for cable? Why? Because then you and I wouldn't sign up, right? So yes, they can set the price, but they are still going to be constrained by demand. When we get to chapter 15, you'll see that. You'll see that constraint that the monopolist faces. Okay. All right, so we have our two extremes. We'll focus on that for 2 chapters. In between is where actually most firms lie. And we're not even going to talk too much about the stuff in between. Why? Because again, the big lessons are learned at the extremes. Okay, we get most of our the economic intuition that comes from competition or lack thereof from the 2 extremes. But let's talk about monopolistic competition. Actually, monopolistic competition firms, this is almost most firms. Most firms fall under this. And so it's very similar to highly competitive industries. So we still have many buyers and sellers. That's supposed to say many. So we still have, again, many buyers and sellers. Notice the title, monopolistic, competitive. Right, so a bit competitive, competition, but also a little bit monopolistic. And the monopolistic part of it comes from the relaxation of this assumption here. Products are no longer identical. So we have heterogeneous products or unidentical products, unstandardized products. And this is where they get their ability to change price a little, just a little though, because the goods are still pretty similar, but they're not the same. Versus over here, they're very similar, practically the same, if not exactly the same. Like wheat is wheat. You don't care which farmer you get it from, Farmer John or Farmer Jane. Wheat is wheat, right? I mean, there may be different grades of wheat, like good wheat versus better wheat, or I don't know how wheat is categorized. I think there's like wheat berry and I don't know, AAA versus AA. I'm making stuff up now. But within AAA, it doesn't matter which farmer you get the wheat from. Right? By the way, there's no such thing as AAA wheat, or at least I doubt it. I've never looked it up. Anyway, so monopolistic competition, we still have many buyers and sellers, except the relaxation of the assumption from competitive markets is that the product is a little bit different. There are still no barriers to entry. So if it's profitable, then the vultures are going to come in. Those entrepreneurs or those firms, those people who are after profits, they're going to come in because there's nothing keeping them out. Same thing with exit. They can leave if they wanted to leave. And so because of this one here, they're able to have a small influence on price. Not too big, just a little. So their impact on price is no longer negligible. A good example of this, by the way, there's so many of them because most things fall under this umbrella. A good example of this would be burgers. Burgers are burgers, right? A burger's a burger. Yeah, no. An In-N-Out burger versus a Habit burger versus an Island burger versus a McDonald's burger. They're different, right? So they're still burgers, but the fact that I slathered it with barbecue sauce and put an onion ring on it and let you sit in a booth at my Island's restaurant, I can charge a little bit more than everybody else, right? So it gives me the ability to influence price a bit. So burgers are a great example of this. Okay, so monopolistic competition. Now, a type of organization of industry, how supply industry organizes, is what we call oligopolies. And oligopolies are closer to monopolies. And if there's two of them, technically it would be really close to monopoly. Two of them, we would call them duopolies. So a duopoly is a special case of an oligopoly. Its defining characteristics is that there are a few firms, or at least only a few that have most of the market share. There could be a bunch of them, but only a few of them have most of the market share. So for example, cereal, very good example of an oligopoly. There's lots of cereal providers out there. I mean, go to Kroger's, go to Sprouts, go to Trader Joe's, go to Albertsons, go to Vons. You're going to see a bunch of different cereal providers, a bunch of like no or no brand, off-brand names. But also, you're going to see the main ones, right? There's 4 primary providers that have most of the world's market share. Who are they? They are, I got to think, Quaker, Post, General Mills, and Kellogg. I nearly forgot. And Kellogg. Those 4 have like 85-90% of the market share, right? So yeah, there's a bunch of firms out there, but 4 of them have the lion's share of the market. Another example would be like cell service, right? This one is just a few firms. We can name them, right? T-Mobile and Verizon and Sprint, and I forgot which other ones. Yeah, there's just a few of them. Right? And so if you can name them, it's an oligopoly. Okay? And so we have a few firms, and their goods can either be identical or unidentical. So like cell phone service, pretty identical. Cereal, unidentical. Right? The cereals aren't exactly the same. The cereal from, Post and Kellogg, the Raisin Bran one even, they're a little different. Right? But, Raisin Bran versus, oh, my phone's talking to me. Raisin Bran versus, shredded wheat. They're a little bit different. They're still cereal, but they're a little bit different, right? So identical or unidentical product. And then there's something. Why are there just a few firms? Because there's something keeping other firms out. So we do have barriers to entry. And again, remember I said the barrier can be the fact that they have most of the market share, right? So barriers to entry, something's keeping them out. For example, another good example would be OPEC, oil producing exporting countries. There's only like a dozen of them. And what's the barrier? You don't have crude oil underneath the ground, right? You don't have the fossil fuels down there. That's a major barrier. Okay, so, and because there's just a few of them, they influence each other, right? They influence what one firm does influences the market conditions that another firm does. So because of this, they behave strategically. So we end up observing strategic behavior. And because we observe strategic behavior here, we use the tools of a subfield of econ, which is known as game theory. Game theory is kind of sick and twisted. I'll kind of explain that to you briefly here. It's amazing, but it's a little sick and twisted. Personally, I think of all the economists out there, those that study game theory, I'm just like, oh yeah, you're the special kids of the special kids, right? The economists already have like their special way of thinking, but out of all of us, we're like, oh yeah, those are the game theorists. They're the ones that are the most fucked up in the head. No, I'm just kidding. No, they're the ones that are like, I don't know. They're fine, but I'm just sometimes after I took a lot of game theory, I took like PhD level, a whole year's worth of game theory. So like mind-blowing game theory. And by the time I was done, I wanted to like, I don't know, bleach my brain or something. Like just stop thinking that way. Because they see all social interactions as games. And so this is kind of a tangent here. They see also social interactions as games. And so a game has three parts. One, it has players. Two, those players have strategies, actions that they can take. And then three, there are payoffs associated with strategies. You take a strategy, I take a strategy, there are payoffs. And game theorists see all social interactions as games. So for example, you and me here, and we haven't even seen each other. This is a game. I'm a player, I'm the professor. You guys are players, you're the students. You interact with me, sure, not directly, but you send me emails, you respond or you don't respond to the discussion forums, you do your homework or you don't do your homework. Me, I have so those are your strategies. I have strategies too. I can not do videos or I can do videos. I can be a bitch on the videos or not be a bitch on the videos. I can be really harsh with super hard exams and only difficult questions or only easy questions, which I would never do. Either extreme I would never do, but those are strategies that are available to me, right? And then when I take on strategies and you take on strategies, ta-da, the state of the world that we're in, it's a game, right? It's the state of the world in which I chose the strategies that I chose and you chose the strategies that you chose. Or here's another example. Coming to an intersection. They see that as a game, right? There are players, the people that come to the intersection, and then do we follow the rules? Do we not follow the rules? Do we stop? Do we not stop? Do I honk because he or she didn't stop, right? So again, all social interactions are a game. Walking down a hallway. Walking down a hallway, we see each other, especially like if you were in my in my in-person class, I know who you are. I don't learn everyone's names because I usually have like 400 students, but I learn everyone's faces. I have the reputation for remembering everyone's faces in my class. In fact, you may have heard that I caught a cheater in a class of 130 or 140 students. I caught a guy who walked in to try to take the exam for somebody else because I did not recognize his face. Yep. Anyway, what's my point? My point is that, if you were in my in-person class and, eventually I'd figure out, hey, this guy or this girl's in my class and I see you walking down the hallway or down the path and we're coming, in opposite directions towards each other, well, that's a game. Right? It's me, it's you. Do I walk left? Do I walk right? Do I make eye contact? Do I not? Same strategies for you. Do I say hi to her or not? Da, da, da. If you don't say hi, you get a bad grade. No, I'm just kidding. But again, these are strategies. And then there are payoffs associated with that. The social awkwardness, or maybe not, or maybe, hey, she's cool and he's cool. And hey, we like saying hi to each other, whatever. Right? So all social interactions are games. So why am I even mentioning this? Is because when you have an oligopoly, there's just a few firms in the industry, they're watching each other, right? If I'm T-Mobile and you're Verizon, and I see that you're providing, who was the first one who did it? I think T-Mobile was the first one of the first ones to do it, where they provided unlimited data. You guys probably, for the most part, you're used to unlimited data, but a few years ago, that wasn't the case. It wasn't unlimited data for one flat fee. Most of them had tiered rates. They were like, okay, for this, 10 gigs, it's this much. For 15 gigs, it's this much. And then every additional gig. And that's what it used to be like. And I think T-Mobile was one of the first ones who said, you know what, we're just going to have one flat fee, unlimited data for everybody. And so AT&T is like, oh shit. Verizon's like, oh shit, right? Why? Because T-Mobile's strategy is going to influence the outcomes of AT&T and Verizon. AT&T's customers are going to jump ship and say, I want to go to T-Mobile. right? So our behavior, our strategies that we pick influences the outcome. So when there's just a few firms, they're watching each other. Is the airline providing, free checked bags or not? Is the airline, suddenly unbundling? I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of airlines recently have unbundled the price of the flight. Now it's the flight. You pay a separate fee for if you want to put a checked bag or an overhead bag. A lot of them are doing that, right? And you'll notice that little by little, it's more and more of them doing that. Why? Because one of them did it first, and then the rest of them either tend to follow suit or kind of call their bluff. And what I've noticed is they're actually following suit. Anyway, we utilize the tools of game theory to analyze oligopolistic behavior, and that would be in chapter 17, and we may or may not get a chance to cover that. All right, so I just wanted you to know, again, the different degrees of competition. In one of our discussion posts, at least as of now, I asked you to tell me about a particular industry in which you think the degree of competition is changing. Maybe it's going from monopoly to here, or maybe to here, or maybe it's jumping to here, or maybe it's going the other way. I don't know. Maybe it was originally very competitive, and then they are now requiring licenses, so only the person with the license gets it. So that would be a monopoly, or maybe it goes to an oligopoly because they issue a few licenses. I don't know. You guys tell me about that. Tell me about an industry in which you've observed that change, a change like this, or you predict that's happening, like it's in the process of happening right now. It hasn't quite happened. So it's happening or it's about to happen, you think, based on maybe changes in laws or maybe in some insider info I don't know. But tell me something about that. Okay, so different degrees of competition. All right, so a scenario. Remember, this is chapter 14 on competitive markets. So let's pretend we're in competitive conditions, and you have to ask yourself a few things. In fact, you'd have to ask yourself these questions for any type of condition, any degree of competition. So you've graduated, you're going to run your own business. You need to make a few decisions, right? You need to decide how much you're going to produce. You need to decide what you're going to price at, how many workers to hire, right? How many pieces of plastic or pounds of plastic or tons of steel or silicone to buy, or I don't know, drafting tables, whatever. What's going to influence your decision? Well, first of all, we've talked about costs. That was chapter 13. Now we're in chapter 14 and we're talking about competition. In fact, each of these chapters that I just listed on that continuum, they each have a different story about revenue. They all in common, every firm, by assumption, they want to maximize profits. And profit is revenue minus cost. Cost, we learn the properties of cost regardless of the degree of competition. Those properties hold. But revenue, the stream of income coming in, it does depend on the degree of competition. Think about it. Where do you think it's easier to get money to come in? Or to charge a higher price? Where it's highly, highly, highly competitive? Or where you're the monopolist and you're the only one producing, right? So again, the degree of competition influences that revenue stream coming in. Anyway, so what are some things that affect your decision making? Your costs, again, the degree of competition that you face, right? So focusing on chapter 14, highly, highly, highly competitive markets. And this is basically a summary of what I just wrote. Many buyers and sellers. The goods are basically the same. Firms can freely enter or exit. This is what we call no barriers to entry or exit. Okay, there are no barriers. And then the implication of 1 and 2 combined is what leads to price-taking behavior. You'll probably recognize this slide or something similar to this slide from chapter 4. All right, so a few things to talk about for the competitive firm. Think about it. It's so competitive on the buyer and seller side, but we're going to focus on the seller side. There are so many firms doing what you're doing that you cannot influence price. If you're selling wheat and the going price for a bushel of wheat is $6, and I come up to you on the trading floor, my trader goes up to your trader and says, "Hey, I want to buy some bushels of wheat." And your trader says, "Well, we're charging $7." My trader, who represents me, is going to say, "Forget you. Look at all these other traders. Look at all these farmers that are being represented here. They're all selling it for $6. Why the hell would I buy it from you?" Okay, so they're going to jump ship off of the demand curve that you face. People are going to jump off of it and not going to want to buy from you and buy from someone else instead. Right? So if you want to sell, you're not going to be able to influence the price. You're going to have to sell your bushel of wheat at $6. Every bushel of wheat, no matter which bushel it is, you're always going to want to sell it. You're always going to have to sell it at $6 if you want to consistently be able to sell it. You might be able to like dupe a few people here and there, but once these people know that there's a lot of other suppliers selling it for $6, you're not going to dupe them for long. So we're not going to model here the duping of people. That's not what we're going to model. We're going to assume that this information is known, right? So again, we're going to model tendencies, not accidents, not regrets, not that sort of thing. Okay, so since we're talking about revenue, we know how to define that, total revenue, right? We're going to use TR for total revenue. Depends on how many units you sell and then the going price for that. That's total revenue, P times Q. Average revenue is P times Q, total revenue, divided by Q, right? Average revenue. So P times Q divided by Q is going to give you P. Yeah, that's average revenue. And like I said a little bit earlier, I'm like, boring. I don't care too much about average revenue. Will you have to be able to compute it? Yeah, but is it sexy? Not at all. While these other things that we're going to be learning about, I think they're pretty darn sexy. In other words, we're actually learning something that gives us some good intuitive understanding of competitive markets versus average revenue. I'm like, okay, yeah, I learned a little, but whatever. Marginal revenue. Listen to those words. Marginal revenue. Forget these letters down here. These words. Marginal revenue. Additional revenue, right? The change in total revenue from selling one more unit. If every bushel of wheat is $6, that means the next bushel of wheat you sell, what are you going to get? $6. And the next one, what are you going to get? $6. And the next one, what are you going to get? $6. That means at the margin, you're getting $6, right? So marginal revenue is that additional money coming in from that next unit that you sell. Or mathematically, the change in total revenue, my total revenue went up by $6. It went from 48 plus 6, so it went to 54. The change in my revenue is 54 minus 48. That's $6 divided by the change in quantity. I sold one more unit. Okay, so delta total revenue, delta QR. And of course, by now, I hope that you recognize that this is really a fraction of changes, right? It's a slope, right? And so it's really the derivative of the total revenue function for those of you that know what I'm talking about when I say derivative. Right? Remember I always said, or the slope, right? The slope of the total revenue function. Remember I said that the slope of any total is the marginal. Well, the slope of the total revenue function is marginal revenue. For you mathies out there, and by the way, you're all mathies. Okay, you're all math people. You are. You know, some of you I know are sitting here thinking like, oh my God, no, I'm not a math person. I'm doing everything I can to avoid mathematics. Folks, we're all math people. We just got to sit down and crunch through it. It just takes lots of exposure, constant exposure, and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice. And that's how you become good or decent, and that's how you understand math. It's not like anyone's a genius. It's not like my engineering students that are sitting here right now taking this class are any brighter than anybody else. That's not it at all. Okay? It's just that they've put in the work that's necessary to understand what's going on. Same thing with economics, right? Most of you, first walked into this class thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? It's going to hurt. And now, yeah, it hurt. It takes some work. But do you understand a lot of stuff? Yeah, you do. If you're listening to this lecture, chances are that you've learned a whole lot. Why? Because you put in the time, right? There's a lot of people who give up, especially on the online class, right? We had a full class. We're towards the end now. We don't have a full class anymore. That's what happens, right? That's what happens in economics. People become intimidated when all they need to do is suck it up, buttercup, right? And grind through, no, don't grind yourself, grind through the material. Anyway, so back to what I was saying earlier, that it should start making sense, right? And what I was going to say is that for those that do know what a derivative is, and those of you that do go on to take more economics, you're going to have to learn these things because you're required to take a certain level of mathematics. And when you do take the next level class, it speaks in math. The language is going to be used, that we use to translate the economic intuition, is going to be mathematics. We start walking away from the graphs. Why? Because the graphs are just extra, right? It's the math that tells us stories. It says, oh, positive and increasing, or negative, or hey, this value can never be negative, or it always has to be above 40. Whatever. The math is always telling us some story. Anyway, that was a tangent. I got a little excited. Okay. Be able to do something like this here. We'll go through it quickly because it's not super sexy. This is not really what I like, but it needs to be done because there is economic intuition here. So here we have quantity. And remember, this is a competitive market. So for every unit that you sell, it does not matter which unit, the price is going to be 10 bucks. Right? So because again, you do not influence price. So in this example, the price is 10 bucks. By the way, actually, no. I'll hold off on that comment. So let's find total revenue. Right? Let's find each of this. Total revenue, average revenue, who cares, but fine, we'll do it. And marginal revenue. So total revenue is price times quantity. You don't make anything, doesn't matter the price, you're not going to get anything for revenue. You made one at 10 bucks, boom, $10. You made two at 10 bucks, $20. Three at 10 bucks, 30, 40, 50. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Okay, average revenue, fine. Total revenue divided by quantity. 20 divided by 2. 30 divided by 3. 40 divided by 4. Boring. Marginal revenue. The change in total revenue when you change quantity. Well, I went from 0 quantity to 1 quantity. My delta Q is 1. My delta TR is I went from 0 total revenue to 10. So my delta TR is 10. So I've got 10 over 1. Marginal revenue of the first unit produced and sold is 10. The next unit, I made one more and I sold it. My total revenue went from 10 to 20. So at the margin, I picked up $10 for that one unit. So 10 divided by 1, 10 divided by 1 gives me 10. And then the next one, again, let me back up. Okay, let me go from the third to the fourth. Revenue went from $30 to $40. So it increased by 10 when I made 1, so 10 divided by 1 is 10. Notice that marginal revenue equals price. It should. It absolutely should. Why? Think about that. Why? I wish I could wait for you to answer. Marginal revenue equals price. Why? Because you are a price-taking firm. No matter which unit you provide to the market, you're always going to get 10 bucks, 10 bucks, 10 bucks, 10 bucks. Because you cannot influence price. If you were one of the few providers in the market, or if you did have influence on price, and you provided more to the market, meaning it's more plentiful, what's going to happen to price? Price is going to drop. If you cut back on your output when you influence price, when you're a market mover, you cut back on your output, what's going to happen to price? It's going to go up because the good is more scarce now because you influenced it. Well, here you have no influence. You're tiny. It's almost as if you don't exist. Think of supply in the market at the market level, not the firm level. At the market level, think of it like a beach. And all of the sand on that big old beach is the product. And you are a farmer, and when you double your output, let's say you were providing 3 handfuls, you decided you're going to double your output, your acreage, you bought more land, I don't know what you did, you became more productive, and you're like, now I'm tripling, now I was producing 3 handfuls of sand, now I'm producing 6 handfuls of sand. Folks, no one's going to notice. It's as if you don't exist. Yeah, to you it's a big deal because you're like, oh my God, I'm twice as big. But the market doesn't notice. You didn't even tickle it. Or if you were to disappear because you go bankrupt or you die, the firm goes under, whatever. Don't die. You will eventually. We all do. But the firm goes under. The market's not going to notice. It's like those 3 or 6 handfuls of sand disappear. The market's like, there was sand there? It does not notice. You are negligible. So you do not influence price. So for every unit that you sell, it doesn't matter if it's the first bushel of wheat or the 1,000th bushel of wheat, the market doesn't notice. To you, 1,000 may seem like a lot, but the market is operating in the millions, in the tens or hundreds of millions potentially. So your 6,000, your 1,000 is nothing compared to the size of the market. All right, let us go. I think I want to go to the whiteboard. That's right. So here, after this, I just want to emphasize here that for a competitive firm, the marginal revenue is equal to that price, the going price in the market. right? Because you do not influence price. This holds. Marginal revenue equals price. And this is only the case for competitive markets. Under a monopolistic structure, for example, or any other type of structure, if you provide more to the market will notice. The fewer firms there are, the more influence you'll have on price. The more firms there are, like for example, monopolistic competition has lots of firms, but there's something different about you and your product, right? There's something different about the product you provide. You're the one that puts the special sauce on it. That's what makes it different. So it allows you to price a little higher. Not crazy higher because there's still a bunch of other burger makers, right? But, you're able to charge another dollar, another $2 or $3 because you provided a bench, a nice bench for them to sit on rather than, a McDonald's drive-thru, right? Okay, so this condition here, or this situation here, that marginal revenue equals price, only holds under competitive conditions. So back to the whiteboard here. We're actually going to be pretty whiteboard heavy today. In fact, I'm not even sure if I'll go back to the slides after this. So if you have a moment, make a moment if you don't. You should, right? You're sitting through this. So pause this lecture as soon as you hear me say this sentence. Go look for different colored markers or pens or colored pencils. So get at least 3 or 4 colors if you can. If you don't have any at your disposal, it's okay. I'll use different directions of lines to denote things. Okay, but it might be a good idea for you to go get different color pens or pencils at this point. Okay, so we are talking about competitive firms, and we just finished saying that for competitive firms, it is the case that marginal revenue equals price. Okay, so that's something that holds. But something else that holds, which we've learned about since week 1, one of the 10 principles was that rational people think at the margin. And we talked about how we should be talking about marginal benefit versus marginal cost, and we want to produce up until the point that they're equal, right? Or we want to do something up until the point that they're equal. For the firm, the marginal benefit of producing is the money they take in, right? So we're going to convert this idea into a firm version of it, which is marginal revenue and marginal cost. Okay, so let's think about the firm. And I need to add some pages, it looks like. Okay, and so let's think about the firm. Let me rewrite this here. Marginal revenue. My claim is that the optimal output rule is to produce at a point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. The optimal output rule. Optimal. The output that is optimal for us to produce, given our objective. Our objective is profit maximization. Okay. And I'm not saying our objective is profit maximization because that's what it should be. I'm saying it's profit maximization because we are human beings and that's how we operate. We're always trying to make ourselves as best off as possible. So whether or not you like it, it doesn't matter. I'm not asking you for your opinion here. I'm saying this is how people behave. We're always constantly trying to make ourselves as best off as possible. So are firms. We've talked about this before. We've said that firms, even supposed nonprofits don't exist in economics. They're called nonprofits because that's how they're categorized by tax code, but they're not nonprofits. Even supposed nonprofits, how they use the phrase outside of this classroom, they also want to maximize profit, because profit, by the way, I'm going to use pi to denote profit. Profit is total revenue minus total cost. They want to make this as big as possible, the money coming in, and they want to make this as small as possible so that the difference is as big as possible. In other words, that's profit maximization, right? Even those that want to save the whales want to minimize their costs and make their revenues as high as possible. So again, it is a realistic assumption. Okay, back to this. So the optimal output rule, that's bugging me, is to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay? And think about it. If that weren't the case, suppose marginal revenue, the money coming in at the margin, the money coming in for the next unit you produce, the marginal unit, the next pencil, the next marker, the next laptop, the next bushel of wheat. The marginal revenue, if it's greater than marginal costs, by the way, this rule applies to all firms. For all firms. This upside down A means for all in mathematics. So for all firms, regardless of the degree of competition, this rule is the rule that all firms would operate under, assuming this objective of profit maximization. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's a monopoly or if it's a competitive firm, this would be the optimal output rule. Okay, why is that the case? Well, if marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, the money coming in, erase that statement. Erase, rewind. If marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, the money coming in, marginal revenue, is more than what it costs to make that next unit. You're making a pen, and it costs you 20 cents to make the pen, marginal cost. And you can sell it for $2, marginal revenue. Should you make it? Absolutely. It is profitable, right? Marginal revenue exceeds marginal cost. Should you make it? Yeah. Should you keep on making stuff? Yes. Keep producing because it is profitable at the margin. Notice that it doesn't matter what you walked in with. Let's say you've made, 1,000 pens from 0 to 1,000. And you're considering making the 1,001th pen plus 1. And when you do that, you can make a marginal profit. Let's say the marginal revenues, you can sell it for $2. So that's what you would sell that pen for. And it only costs you 20 cents to make it. Should you make that pen? Absolutely. You made a profit of $1.80 on that. It does not matter if you walked in with a profit. If for these 1,000 units you had a profit, pi is greater than 0. Remember, pi denotes profit. If you have a positive profit and you make this next pen, you just increased your profits. So it's, given your objective, it's a good idea. If you walked in with a loss, you had 1,000 pens that you made and you had lost money, and you make this next pin, that next pin is profitable. What happens to your losses? Your losses shrink because you just made a profit at the margin. So no matter what you walked in with, whether you walked in with a loss or whether you walked in with a profit for those 1,000 pens, it always made sense to make the 1,001st unit, the marginal unit. This is what we mean by marginal, right? That next unit. It makes sense, assuming this is the case, assuming marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. In other words, keep going, produce. It is profitable at the margin. If you walked in with profits, you just made them bigger. If you walked in with losses, you just helped shrink them. Okay? So absolutely make that pen. Keep going. Keep producing. All right, what if it's the other way around? What if marginal revenue is less than marginal cost? By the way, if you're still increasing quantity here, you haven't reached that steady state. You haven't reached the point where you say, okay, this is the sweet spot. Stop. No, here it says don't stop. Here it says keep going. Okay. All right. If you need to rewind to make sense of that again, go ahead. Stop. Rewind. Listen to it again. All right. Now suppose that marginal revenue is less than marginal cost. You can sell it for $2, say. Well, if we want to use other numbers, we can. But it costs you $3 to make it. Should you make it? No, you're losing money. Should you have gone that far? No. Next week, if nothing changes, if everything's the same still, will you go that far? No. Next week, you're going to say, no, back up. Decrease quantity. I have gone too far. It is too high, the quantity. I need to decrease quantity because I am losing money. If I walked in with those 1,000 pins and I'm considering making the 1,001th and I had a profit, I just shrunk my profits, right? I added a negative number to it because I lost money at the margin by making the 1,001th pin. Bad idea. Don't do that again. Burn. Don't do that again. Lesson learned. If I walked in with losses, well, I just made my losses bigger. Bad idea. Burned. Don't do it again. Next time, back up. Fewer units to produce. Okay. So, again, If marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, then you should keep going. If marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, back up. That's why the sweet spot is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. It ensures that you exhaust all marginal profits and eliminate all marginal losses. To get that idea across graphically, I'm going to draw dollar signs here and quantity here. And let's do marginal revenue. We'll do it constant, especially because of the competitive firm, like the $6 for every bushel of wheat. Remember, by the way, I'll use this opportunity to teach you something else. For the competitive firm, it does not matter which unit you provide, whether it's one of the first units or one of the ones way down here, you're always going to get $6, $6, $6, $6. That's what you're going to get at the margin, right? It does not matter which unit it is because you're tiny. You don't exist almost. So this marginal revenue line, which also represents the price in the market, is also actually the demand curve that the firm faces. The perfectly competitive firm doesn't face a demand curve that goes like this. Nope. Because what this means here, that means that if the price is here, you'll sell that many. If you increase price, you'll sell that many. In other words, you influence price. You don't influence price under competitive conditions. Under competitive conditions, it doesn't matter if it's this unit or that unit, you're always going to get $6. So the demand curve looks like this. Is this a perfectly elastic demand curve or a perfectly inelastic demand curve? Can you make an E or can you make an I? You can make an E, right? So the competitive firm faces a perfectly elastic demand curve. Perfectly elastic demand curve. Okay, so I just took the opportunity to teach you that because it will matter. We're talking about competitive markets here. Okay. Now back to my story about marginal revenue and marginal cost and how this is the sweet spot. This is the optimal output rule that identifies that sweet quantity that you should produce at, which I call Q star. So let me redraw this here. And I'll try not to be as sloppy. Let's say marginal revenue looks like this. That's for a competitive firm. For a firm that influences price, ask yourself, what does marginal revenue look like? The more it provides to the market, what do you think happens to marginal revenue? It drops or it goes up at the margin? The more it provides to the market, the lower the marginal revenue. The fewer units it provides to the market, the higher the marginal revenue because the higher that price. So for a non-competitive firm or a firm that's not in a competitive, highly competitive market, marginal revenue is going to look like this. It's negatively sloped. It's going to look like that demand curve. It's not going to be the demand curve. We'll learn later. It's going to look like the demand curve though. Okay. And so we can use either one to get this point across here. I'm just going to stick with this flat one only because we're talking about chapter 14. And so again, why are we even mentioning this right now is because I want to show you how getting to this point here is the sweet spot that identifies the optimal output rule. And so that is the optimal output rule. So there's marginal revenue. Marginal cost tends to increase as you've learned by now, chapter 8, right? Why does marginal cost go up? Why? Because eventually diminishing returns kick in. Remember that? And remember, sometimes you have the Nike swoosh. We're just not going to put it in here just because it makes it easier. All right, so let me identify where they intersect. This point here is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And I just told you that this identifies your sweet spot, your Q star, where you, the firm, should produce. So I'm going to point that out here. This is the sweet spot. This is the optimal output, the quantity that achieves your objective. And what's your objective? Profit maximization. And so let me show you graphically why that's the case. Suppose you're not there. Suppose you're to the left of that. We'll call it the red unit here, that red marginal unit. Well, for that unit, here's marginal cost, and marginal cost is less than marginal revenue. Should you produce this marginal unit? Absolutely. It's profitable at the margin. That right there is your marginal profit, right? The additional profit you get from providing this additional marginal unit. That's marginal profit. That was my attempt at writing MPI. Marginal profit. You have positive marginal profit. Produce, pick it up. Do not leave money on the table. If you stop here, look at all this money you're leaving on the table. All these marginal profits you're leaving on the table. And remember, this doesn't mean you're necessarily profiting as a whole. That just means that you're doing better by going in that direction. Because if you had profits up until these units and you made this marginal unit, you just picked up extra profit. So you just made your profits bigger. If you had losses walking into that unit and you make that unit, you just shrank your losses, right? You added positive profit to it at the margin. So you shrunk your losses. That is also a good thing. If you're going to be in the world of losses, you want to minimize those losses. This is helping you minimize those losses. So keep going. Don't stop at that marginal unit. Go all the way. Pick up all of these marginal profits. Exhaust the marginal profits, right? Go in that direction. Why? Because you want to exhaust the marginal profits. Pick them up. That's a pie. Pick them up, right? Go in that direction. Pick them all up. All these marginal profits. If you're to the right of it, though, over here, look at that. If you're to the right of it, say this bluest unit, the marginal unit, the blue unit. For that unit, the marginal revenue, the money that comes into the firm from providing that marginal unit to the market, is less than the marginal cost. If you make this, this is negative marginal profit. You are worse off by this amount. Don't let the blue and the red confuse you. I know blue is usually associated with positive numbers and red with negative. Nope, don't let that confuse you. It's costing you more at the margin than you're taking in at the margin. These are negative marginal profits. In other words, they're marginal losses. Do not pick them up. Next time, you don't want to be there. You want to back up. Eliminate all of these marginal losses. These are all marginal losses. Eliminate them. Eliminate marginal, I'll just write it out. Losses. You don't want to pick them up. Back the fuck up. Right, back up. You don't want to be there. That burns. Lesson learned. Back up. Okay. So this is why we say Q star is a sweet spot. If you can get to Q star, then you've ensured you've exhausted all marginal profits and eliminated all marginal losses. Okay. We can't always get there, as MindTap will show you, as the textbook will show you, as the practice problems will show you. Sometimes because you can't exactly match those two things, then you're going to do it up until the last unit where you still have marginal profit. And then if for the next unit you get into marginal losses, then no, don't go there. Go to that last unit where you still had a marginal profit. Right? You may not have, because in other words, the optimal quantity might be like 1.5 cars. I'm sorry, we can't make 1.5 cars because that 0.5 is not going to sell. Right? So you might have to leave it at 1. Okay. All right. So I just wanted to get that point across. And so we're going to combine that with price-taking behavior. Remember, this is price-taking behavior. For competitive firms are price takers. At the margin, what are they going to get? They're always going to get that price. That market price always. That price, that price, that price. Always, always, always. So let's combine price-taking behavior with not competitive, sorry. That was the competitive conditions. Price-taking behavior with optimization and see what we get. So remember we said all firms are trying to achieve the objective of profit maximization. So again, this is all firms. This right here is profit maximization. So this equality here is profit maximization. I'll just write profit maximization. So again, all firms want to do that. Now, layer onto this the fact that competitive firms, price is equal to marginal revenue, or I should say marginal revenue is equal to price. because they are price takers. At the margin, they're always going to get $6, $6, $6, or whatever their price is for whatever they're selling in that competitive market. So this here is optimization, profit maximization, or loss minimization if you're in loss territory. That's for all firms. This here is for competitive markets. The competitive firm is a price taker. So if we combine both of these things, the fact that they're in competitive conditions and they want to maximize profits, combine them, we get price is equal to marginal cost. We get marginal cost pricing. Right? Price is equal to marginal cost. That's the implication of being profit maximizers under competitive conditions. And listen to this. Look at this for a while. You're selling something and you're pricing at marginal cost. You're a firm. Do you like that? No. Hell no. Not just no, but hell no. This is why we don't like competitive markets, right? If you're a firm or if you're thinking of starting up your own business and it's in a highly competitive industry, let me tell you right now, do something to make your good different. Do something to try to get rid of or try to lessen that competitive nature in the industry that you're in, right? Make your product different somehow. Or can you create a barrier? Good luck. But it's hard. It's hard to do. Okay, let's keep going. What else do I want to talk about? Let me think. So, back to price-taking behavior. Let's talk about the firm versus the market. And not versus as in against each other, just like side by side. So the firm, okay, it's not the market. The market is everyone. The firm is the firm, just one firm. And as I said just a little while ago, the firm takes the prices given, right? This horizontal line is price. It's also marginal revenue for the firm. It's also its perfectly elastic demand curve that it faces. It can sell as much or as little as it wants. Demand will be defined as long as it charges the right price. And what's the right price? That market price, right? P, whatever price is. Whatever it is, $6 in my example that I keep mentioning. Where does that price come from? Where do prices come from? They come from supply and demand. They come from the intersection of supply and demand at the market level. And so remember in chapter 13 I told you, oh, little q, big Q, who cares? Now I care about when you use big Q and little q. Little q is going to denote the output of a particular firm. Big Q is going to denote the output of the whole market. So basically, big Q is the sum of all the little q's, firm 1, firm 2, all the way to the nth firm. Okay? So big Q is the market level output, and little q is the firm. And so the firm is taking this price as given. We'll call it P naught. And where's that price coming from? It's coming from the intersection of supply and demand at the market level. That's where it's coming from. It's not coming out of thin air. It's coming from the market. We're going to come back to this plot in a bit. All right, sticking with the firm. We're going to draw 4 cases, and you may have to take these in pieces, by the way. You may want to cover the first 2 or the first 3 and then the 4th one at the end, or maybe just 2 and then the last 2, or all of them. Sit through it all. But I will tell you that it does get confusing until you practice and sit through it again and sit through it again until it makes sense, because it will make sense. In fact, as I'm talking about it, it'll probably make sense to you then. But then if I asked you, hey, turn off the video and do it yourself, you're probably going to be stuck. Why? Because you need to do it over and over and over and over to fully internalize it. And let me tell you, yes, on the exam online, if you take the exam online, you won't be able to draw anything because the system doesn't let us require you to do that. But let me tell you, I will find a way to see if you understand how to interpret these graphs. And then chances are you're not taking that exam online, especially for future online classes. They're going to be taking the exam in person. And let me tell you, I'm going to ask you to draw these things, so you best master them. Okay. And that's not a threat, that's just a fact. And I'll help you. That's what I'm here for, right? And that's why you can hit pause, stop, and rewind. That's the benefit of taking this class, right? The people who take my class live and in person, they can't stop me and rewind me. They can ask questions, but then they lose me when they walk out of the class, right? So that is a big advantage of taking this class online. Okay, we're going to cover 4 cases, and we're going to look at the firm, the conditions that it faces, and what happens to its profit. And we're going to see, should the firm produce or should the firm not produce? If it does produce, how much should it produce? So for now, I'm going to give you a statement and you're just going to believe me, and we're going to draw it, and we're going to show you, I'm going to show you graphically why this makes sense. So let me make sure I've got this set up right. Yep. So case 1. My claim is that, case 1, that if price is above, if it's greater than average total cost, in particular, just to help you with the drawing, greater than the minimum of average total cost, the minimum point. Remember, average total cost looks like that, chapter 8. So if it's greater than this minimum point right there, that the firm should produce. That implies and is implied by, no, it's going to drive me nuts. It implies and is implied by that the firm is making positive economic profit. So profits are greater than 0. This is driving me nuts. Profits are greater than 0. And hey, you entrepreneur, owner of a firm, do you want to produce when you're making positive profits? Yes. Right? So if it's making positive economic profits, then it should produce. It should absolutely produce. It should not shut down. Quantity should be greater than 0. It should not shut down. Absolutely you want to be producing, because your objective is to maximize profits and you're in profit territory, so do it. Okay. So let me show you why this is the case. So let's draw the firm. Again, this is looking at the firm, not the market, the individual firm. So just to make sure you know that, we'll remind you of that here. And start with what you know, folks. Chapter 13, you know cost curves. And cost curves look like this. Oh, nope, I failed. It's got to intersect at its minimum point. Not too bad. I'm going to layer average variable cost here, making sure they start converging. Remember that? Chapter 13? Okay, so start with the cost curves and now impose the condition. The condition says price is greater than average total cost, in particular than the minimum point of average total cost. So let me draw that. I'm going to put price, as long as it's above this point here, right? I'm going to put price, here, let me give myself a pink pen with a little more thickness here. There we go. I'm going to put price right there, as long as it's above this point there. And so I'm going to call that P1 for case 1. It's also marginal revenue under case 1, so I'll put MR1. That's a 1, comma D. That's the demand curve that the firm faces. Okay, because remember that pink line is price and marginal revenue, because marginal revenue is price for the competitive firm, and the demand curve. As it can charge as much as, it can make as much or as little as it wants, and it'll sell it. Demanders will buy it, because there's lots of demanders too, right? As long as the price is right. And what's the price got to be? It's got to be P1. Okay, so that's that horizontal line. Well, the optimal output rule says to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's right here. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Right, so that's right here. Right there we have marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So take this in pieces, folks. Look what we've done. We drew our cost curves, which by now we should be comfortable with. We impose the condition that price is above the minimum of average total cost. And this we now optimize, and that identifies the optimal output for the firm. How much should this firm produce? It should produce Q star 1. Given its objective of profit maximization, this is the sweet spot. This is how much it should produce. And now, my claim again was that the firm is profiting. Let me show you that. We need to show that the firm is profiting. And we know what profits are. Profits are total revenue minus total costs. Right? Don't lose track of that, right? Profit is what? Total revenue minus total costs. So we need to show that we have positive economic profits according to this condition here, right? And so let's show that. Let's show revenue and let's show costs. We can show that because we know revenue is price times quantity. Well, we know price and we know quantity. So if we multiply those two things together, we'll let total revenue be represented by lines like this in case you don't have different color pens. Well, it's price times quantity. This is total revenue. Right? P times Q. Now we need to show total cost. Well, I'm going to show you a trick to finding total cost because we technically don't have total cost. We have average total cost. It's not the same thing as total cost. They're close, they're related, but we don't have total cost. We have average total cost. So look at what average total cost is. Average total cost, you know what it is total cost divided by quantity, right? Any average divided by the quantity. You get the total divided by quantity to get the average. And so that's what average total cost is. We'll just solve for total cost. Total cost is ATC times Q. We have this information. We know what Q is. The Q is Q1. 1 for case 1, star for optimal. Is Q1. Do we know the average total cost of Q1 units? Yeah, we do. What's the average total cost of producing Q1 units? I went the wrong way. Go straight up to the average total cost curves. I don't know how to draw straight lines. Go to the average total cost curve. That is the average total cost of producing the Q1 units, ATC1. Right, again, take your quantity and go straight up. It's a function. That's my attempt at going straight. Go straight up to the average total cost curve and it identifies the average total cost of producing Q1 units. I'm going to give you a warning. You're going to be like a moth to the flame who is like, ooh, an intersection. Don't do that. You're going to get burned. Okay, go straight up. Don't go to that point just because it's an intersection. Right? Just because the ATC and the MC are crossing there. Don't do that. Don't be like the moth to the flame that gets burned by the fire. Okay, so now we know ATC and we know Q. Well, guess what? We can find total cost because total cost is ATC times Q. So total cost, we're going to use lines going in this direction. It's ATC times Q, which is this area here. And so you'll notice that the green box, which is total revenue, is bigger than the red box, which is total cost. And that means you have something left over. What is this? That's your profit. Your positive economic profit. Profit greater than 0. Profit could be less than 0, in which case it's really a loss or it's negative profit, right? So here we have your positive economic profit, right, shown on the graph. And that's exactly what we showed here. We said if price is greater than ATC min, that implies and is implied by positive economic profits, and you should be producing, because why would you not produce if you're profiting? So anytime price is greater than ATC, the firm should be producing, and not only that, is actually profiting. You can actually see that also. By the way, you need to master this. Absolutely. This is, by the way, of the 4 cases, one of the easier ones. There are 2 easy ones and 2 tricky ones. Cases 1 and 2 are easy. Case 2 is the easiest. Case 3 and 4 are tricky. Okay. And so, let's see. So make sure you master this. Again, it's going to take practice and practice and practice. I want to show you algebraically why this is the case. Why when this happens, you're making positive economic profits. So let's write that down. We said price is greater than average total cost. Okay. Multiply through by quantity everywhere, the quantity you produce. So price times quantity, multiply through everywhere. Folks, what's this? That's total revenue. What's this? That's total cost. Ding, 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 ding. Profits. Total revenue exceeds total cost. You are profiting. Yay. So again, it's in here, right? The economic intuition is right there. It's in the mathematics, right? It's in the setup, this inequality. All right, that's case 1. Case 2. My claim is that if price is equal to average total cost, what do you think that implies? Go back to this. If these are equal, what about profit? Profit is 0, right? That implies and is implied by profit being equal to 0. 0 economic profits. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? If you're making 0 economic profits, my claim is you should be producing. Produce. Quantity is greater than 0. Do not shut down. Okay, produce. So let's show you why. Here we go. That's our second case. Let me actually go right down the lines. I forgot how we did them. Total revenue. Okay. Again, if you have different color pens or pencils, if you don't have different colors, you can just use the directions of the lines. Let's show this case. This is the firm. We know that because it's little q. And also because we're going to write firm right here. Okay, start with what you know. Ladies and gentlemen, you know cost curves. Cost curves, here we go. Marginal cost. My U-shaped average total cost curve. Kind of intersected at the minimum. Ugh, that's why you should bring an eraser to the exam. Ugh, I keep failing. I'm close. There we go. I'll keep that one. A little shaky, but who cares? All right, and now I'm going to add average variable costs. So far, average variable cost hasn't had much to say. Notice it had nothing to say over here. We didn't invoke it. Right? We never were like, what's the variable cost? We could have found variable cost if we wanted to. We could be like, hey, the average variable cost of Q1 units is there. That identifies ABC, and ABC times Q gives you variable cost. We could have done that if we wanted to. But when you're profiting, you're like, who cares what variable costs are? They're being covered. Notice that variable cost would have been this part. They're being covered by the green box. They are fully being covered by revenue. That'll come into play again in case 3. For case 1, doesn't have much to say. Case 2. Okay. My claim is that price is at minimum of average total cost. So it is right there. Oh, not too bad. So this is price. We'll call it P2 for case 2. We also know that that's marginal revenue for the firm. We'll call it MR2 for case 2. And it's also the perfectly elastic demand curve that this firm faces. So we'll call it D2 for case 2. Optimal output rule says to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And I know it looks like it overlaps in other places too. That's just because I didn't draw it perfectly, but there you go. Happy? I am. I had to do that because it was bugging me. All right, so it's only intersecting at that one point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That is our optimal output rule. It identifies the quantity that achieves our objective of profit maximization or loss minimization if we're in the world of losses. We'll call it Q star 2 for the optimal quantity under condition 2, case 2. And let's do the same thing we did before. We need to show that we're breaking even. We showed it algebraically already. But we need to show it graphically. Well, total revenue is price times quantity. Price is P2, quantity is Q2. That area is here. This is price times quantity. That's total revenue. Total cost, we're going to use the same trick we used before. Remember, average total cost is total cost divided by quantity. Solve for total cost, multiply by quantity on both sides, and we get that total cost is equal to average total cost times quantity. That is total cost. And so, what's the average total cost? We need this piece. The average total cost of Q2 units, well, here's my Q2. I'm going to go straight up to the average total cost curve. In that case, it does happen to be where it intersects the marginal cost curve. So I'm going to go straight up to that point, and that identifies my average total cost of production, which is here. And that was the case by assumption, right? And so ATC times Q gives me this region. And guess what? Green is equal to red. What are profits? If total revenue equals total cost, profits are 0. So if price is equal to average total cost, in particular, the minimum point. The reason I put this is just because it's going to help you graphically. You don't have to put it there, because even remember here, we didn't put it there, and it showed us total revenue equals total cost. That's just to help you with the graph. All right, so we have shown case 2. When price is equal to average total cost, the firm is breaking even. This is what we call actually the break-even condition. Break-even case. Okay, case 3. Case 3, guess what's going to happen to profits? They are going to be negative. We are entering loss territory. Price is going to be somewhere down here, lower than that minimum point of average total cost. So, case 3. My claim is that if price, and this is when average variable cost says, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. If price is less than average total cost, you already know that's loss territory, right? Because if it's not at it or above it, then we must be making losses. So if price is less than average total cost, but above average variable cost, my claim is that you should produce at a loss. So your profits will be negative. In other words, you have a loss, but produce, but operate. Operate at a loss. Do not shut down. Do not shut down. Do not shut down. If you shut down under these conditions, you will be worse off. Okay. So I probably should have started this case by asking you a question, by telling you, hey, this case is the case where you're going to lose money, but I promise you should produce. And you're thinking like, what the hell, Professor Morales? And I'm going to be like, yeah, I'm saying operate under shitty conditions. And you're like, no, I hate shitty conditions. And I'm going to say, yes, but this is optimal. This is the best thing for you to do right now. Why would it be the best thing for you to do right now? Because if you did something else, it must be that it is shittier. Right? It's kind of like choosing between two shitty options, right? You're choosing between two bad options. What are you going to do? You're going to choose the least harmful one. You're going to choose the one that does the least amount of damage. They both do damage, but do the least harm to yourself. And that is what you're doing here. You're operating at a loss. You're producing at a loss, yes. But if you shut down, meaning if you stop producing, you will be worse off. And so we'll see that both graphically and then we'll see it mathematically as well. Okay, before we draw it, let's close your eyes again. You are a restaurateur, Restaurants are very competitive, by the way. That's why they're not surviving on State Street in Santa Barbara. We'll come back to that in a bit. So, you own a restaurant and you're losing money. Think about your different types of costs. You have fixed costs, which is something like your rent. Let's say you pay $3,000 a month in rent. And no matter how many meals you make, you still have to pay the $3,000, right? If you make no meals, you have to pay $3,000. If you make 500 meals, you still have to pay only $3,000 for your rent. That doesn't change. But what costs do change when you produce? If you don't make burgers, you don't have to buy tomatoes. If you don't make burgers, you don't have to buy buns. You don't have to buy meat. You don't have to buy napkins. You don't have to buy mayonnaise. And the more burgers you make, the more meat you have to buy, the more buns you have to buy, the more tomatoes you have to buy, the more lettuce you have to buy. What kind of costs are those? Those are variable costs. So variable costs, you do not have to incur. No one's putting a gun to your head saying, make the fucking burger, right? No one's doing that. You do not have to pay that. You don't have to incur variable costs, but you do have to pay your rent. If you don't, they will take you to court. So that's something that you can't avoid. But variable costs you can avoid. You can eliminate them by not making meals. So I hope you have your eyes closed, by the way. If you are producing, money's coming in because you're making meals and you're selling them, then it better be the case that that money coming in can completely cover that cost that you can eliminate. Let me say that again. If you are losing money and you choose to produce, then it better be the case that that money coming in completely covers that cost you can eliminate, that variable cost. You should not be taking a loss on tomatoes because you didn't have to buy tomatoes. You better be able to cover that. You better be able to cover that. Because otherwise, do not produce. Do not take a loss on a cost you can avoid. Do not take a loss on a cost you can avoid. So, again, keep your eyes closed. Let's say that the money coming in, the revenue, the total revenue, does cover the cost of tomatoes and the cost of buns and the cost of mayo. But as a whole, you're still losing money. So the money coming in, revenue, completely covers your variable costs. And there's a little bit left over. Not enough to cover all your fixed costs, but there's a bit left over. What are you going to use that little bit for? You're going to use that to pay off your rent. Right? That's what you're going to use that for. And it's better, as long as total revenue exceeds variable costs, it's better to produce. Because if you do not produce, again, assuming you can cover that cost, you can eliminate your variable cost. If you don't produce when total revenue exceeds your variable costs, sure, you get rid of your variable costs. You don't have to buy tomatoes. But you also get rid of your total revenue. And that's not good under these assumptions. Because, again, listen to what I've been telling you. If the money coming in completely covers that cost you can eliminate, total revenue exceeds variable costs, then that little bit that's left over from that total revenue that came in, what are you going to use it for? You're going to use it to pay down part of your fixed costs. If you shut down under these assumptions, sure, you get rid of your variable costs, but you also get rid of your total revenue, which means you get rid of that little bit that helps you pay off your fixed costs, and therefore your loss isn't just part of the fixed cost that's left over. It is the entire fixed cost. You just grabbed a gun and shot yourself in the foot. Bad idea, honey. You're going to lose money, yes, by producing, but you're minimizing your losses. Produce, assuming these conditions. Okay? Hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, stop, rewind, and sit through that again. Let's model this. So, by the way, it's in here too, right? Multiply through by quantity. AVC times Q, P times Q, ATC times Q. What is this? Use the same trick that we did up here, except put a V instead of a T. Well, this is variable cost, total variable cost. What's in the middle? Total revenue. What's on the right? Total cost. You are losing money. Total cost exceeds total revenue, but your revenue covers your variable cost. Produce. Okay, let's draw this. I'm not going to re-emphasize that because pause, rewind. um, let me draw this case. And the case conditions are given here. I get excited when I talk about these things. Because why? Because they make so much sense. And they help make sense of why restaurants operate. Folks, especially if you live in town or if you're from Santa Barbara, because I know some of you are from Santa Barbara, but you're away at college somewhere else. State Street. Have you ever walked into a restaurant here in Santa Barbara or anywhere else where you walk in and you're the only one there and maybe you went to study and all you did was buy a coffee and they've been open and no one's really been walking in and you're like, what the fuck? How are they still in business? They're probably operating under case 3. They're losing money, but they're minimizing their losses. It makes sense for them to continue to operate. When are they going to shut down? Assuming the conditions still hold, the moment they can get out of that fixed obligation. Right? That's what's pinning them down. The fact that they still have to pay that rent. But the moment they can get out of that lease, they're like, peace, I'm out. Right? Assuming nothing changes. Unless the price goes up or their costs go down, okay, then maybe they'll keep going because maybe eventually it's profitable. But if those conditions don't change, they're going to leave as soon as they get out of their fixed obligation. In other words, as soon as they jump into the long run. Because remember, the long run is the period of time in which all of your inputs are variable. And if you're locked in a lease, you are not in the long run. You are in the short run. And we live in the short run, folks. We don't stay in the long run for long. Okay. Let me draw this finally. I'll stop talking. Okay, so start with what you know. We know cost curves. Show the cost curves. I'm going to separate ATC and AVC because the action happens in the middle. So that's why I'm going to separate it. There's my marginal cost curve. Oh, that wasn't too bad. Oh, okay, a little bit better. There's ATC. Here's AVC. They converge. And then price is going to be somewhere in between. Doesn't have to be exactly. It could be there, just somewhere in between. I'm just going to draw it there. So it's going to be P3 for case 3. Where does it come from? The intersection of supply and demand at the market level, of course. That's P3. Marginal revenue 3 for case 3. Demand for case 3. This is the firm. The firm is going to optimize by producing where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and that's there. And so that identifies the optimal output, Q star 3 for case 3. This is the sweet spot. It should still produce. Yes, we're soft. Sorry. Let me state that again. Yes, it's losing money, but it's choosing the least harmful bad situation. Okay, it's choosing between two bads. If you had a choice between shitty option A and shitty option B, which one are you going to pick? The one that is less shitty. Okay, I know that's not technical in any book anywhere, but if I wrote an econ book, that's what I would write on page 399. I would write, choose the least shitty option. This is why I'm not writing an econ book. Anyway, so let's do what we've been doing. I think total revenue were lines like this. Let me go confirm because I have, yes, forgotten total revenue. And then total cost is going to be, I've been using red for total cost. Total cost is going to be lines like this. Here we go. Total revenue. Price is P3. Quantity is Q3. Here is total revenue. Total cost. Well, quantity is Q3. Goes straight up to the average total cost curve. It touches there. Not there. Don't be that moth. Goes straight up to the average total cost curve that identifies the average total cost of producing the Q3 units. Well, ATC times Q is total cost. And you should immediately see that total cost exceeds total revenue. So you should be able, whoops, you should be able to see that loss. Right? That loss is this top part, which I'm not going to shade in yet. Actually, I'll go ahead and shade it in. This right here, what is this? This is the loss. The red exceeds the green by this amount. This is that negative profit. Profit is less than 0. This is a loss, right? Negative economic profits. In other words, a loss. So that's the size of the loss. And you can quantify it, right? ATC minus P and then times Q. That's the loss. Okay. So this shows us this part of it, that we're losing money. But we have not yet proven graphically that we should produce. And remember what I told you. You run a restaurant. Money's coming in, and that money can cover what? Why are you producing? Because that revenue can cover your variable costs. So we need to show that the green box, the revenue, covers variable costs. We can identify total variable costs. Total variable costs, we will use lines that go like this, and we'll call it VC. If you want to put a T for total, you can. Total variable costs. I'll put it in parentheses because not all textbooks use the T. Sometimes they just call it variable costs. Not all websites use the T. And so we're going to use vertical lines for that. We're going to use the same trick we did before, except now we're going to say, oh, average variable cost is variable cost times quantity. So then that means, that implies and is implied by, that variable cost is average variable cost times quantity. Dun dun dun, same exact trick. So what's the average variable cost of producing Q3 units? It is right here. Go straight up. Again, don't be like that moth. Go straight up. And that identifies, that's my crappy straight line. That identifies the average variable cost of producing Q3 units. So AVC times Q gives us our variable costs. And notice exactly what we were talking about earlier when I had you close your eyes. The green color covers the blue. The revenue coming in completely covers your variable costs. Your blue, vertical lines, the box with the vertical lines. Your revenue coming in completely covers your variable costs. And then there's a little bit left over to help you pay off your fixed costs. Where's your fixed costs? Well, if this big box, the red one, is your total costs, and this box is your variable costs, then this must be your fixed costs. Right? The difference, again, here's your total costs. There's your variable costs. That means that this difference in here is your fixed costs. And notice that the green, there's part of green left over after you pay your variable costs. After you pay your blue box down here, there is some green left over to help you pay off part of that fixed cost. Which part of it? Only this part. Not all of it, because this is all your fixed costs. Right? Not all of it. That's why you have that loss up there. It only helps you pay off that zigzaggedy line one. That part of your fixed costs. If you shut down, yeah, you get rid of the blue vertical line box, your variable costs, but you also get rid of your green, which means your loss would have been bigger. Your loss would have been this whole thing. You would have been worse off. You chose the worst shitty option in that case. So do not shut down. Produce. Produce at a loss, yeah, but it's minimizing your losses. That is case 3. Case 3 is one of the harder ones out of the 4 cases. Case 3 and case 4 are the harder ones.
Yes?
No.
Okay.
That's my iPad. Everything's talking to me. Ay, ay, ay. All right, folks. You might need a breather. Pause and then continue. We're going on to case 4. So case 4 must be what? Take a guess. Do not produce. Right. Losing money, but shutting down. Case 4. So I thought I'd give you a mental break here. My kitty cat, I'm putting him to sleep. He's like, oh no, not competitive markets again. Oh. So I thought I'd give you a mental break here. My kitty cat, I'm putting him to sleep. He's like, oh no, not competitive markets again. Oh. So case 4. So we've covered case 1. Firm is making profits. Price is above ATC. Case 2, firm is breaking even. Case 3, firm is losing money but operate. So the last case we're left with is the firm is losing money and it should shut down. So where do you think price is? Price must be less than average variable cost. Okay, so if price is less than average variable cost, then I'm going to write min again just to help you with the drawing. And this tablet is killing me. I bought a new tablet, but the thing is I need to transfer this software that I use to record the videos to the new one, and I don't know my password. So that's going to take work. I'll do that eventually. But anyway, all right, so price is less than average variable cost. And that implies and is implied by the firm is losing money, meaning it's in loss territory. So pi, or profit, is less than 0. And it should shut down. Shut down. Okay, the firm should shut down. This is the shutdown case. Shutdown should be one word. Okay, so again, algebraically, you should be able to see it through here. If you multiply this by Q, you get total revenue. If you multiply this by Q, you get variable cost, total variable cost. Revenue is less than total variable cost. You are not covering the cost you can eliminate by shutting down. You should not be taking a loss on variable costs. Okay, let's draw it. We're experts by now. By the way, this is going to be a proof by contradiction. What we mean by that, there's a bunch of different ways to prove things. This is going to be a proof by contradiction. We should find that we shouldn't produce, right? Q equals 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to contradict this. We're going to say, suppose we do produce. Q is greater than 0. We're going to show how it was a bad idea to do that. And so therefore we shouldn't produce. Again, it's a proof by contradiction, by going against what we should be doing. We should be shutting down. Okay. And it's a graphical proof, of course. All right, so start with what we know. We know, I'm going to draw this a little bit bigger. We know, maybe not that big, cost curves. All right, this is the firm. And there's our marginal cost curve. And there's our average total cost curve. Actions happening below average variable costs. So I'm kind of going to collapse them up or send them up here sort of. There we go. There's AVC, and I'm going to put price below that minimum point of AVC. P4 for case 4, marginal revenue 4, demand 4 for case 4. Here's the contradiction. If the firm does produce, where would it produce? It would produce here, where marginal revenue equals marginal costs. So here's the contradiction. Our result up there says we should not be producing. We should be at Q equals 0. But we will not. Let's contradict that. Proof by contradiction. All right. If that's the case, here we go again, folks. We're pros at this by now. We know we use total revenue, lines like that. Total cost, we use lines like that. Here we go. Total revenue, P4 times quantity. There it is. Total revenue. Total cost happens to be way up here, the average total cost. That's not why we're shutting down. Not because this, total cost is way bigger than revenue. No, that's just this is what I call graphical, this is what I call visualization bias. What if I had drawn this curve, this one right here, just shorter? Then that box wouldn't have been as big. right? And obviously I would have had to take the average variable cost down too. But so don't fall into the trap of, oh my God, look, it's way up there. That's why we should shut down. No, we're shutting down because of the economics behind it, not because of the way we drew something. Again, don't fall into the trap of visualization bias. People fool other people with graphs all the time. Usually not economists. It's hard to fool an economist. Economists are really good at pointing these things out. I like to call myself an economist slash truth seeker slash bullshit detector. Seriously. Anyway. Okay, so, and part of that is picking up on this visualization bias, right? When someone's trying to fool us into believing something. Kind of like, if someone says, oh, look, that's going up. And in reality, that's because they're all zoomed in. But if you really look at it, it could be that that's just a little part of it and the rest of it is actually pretty flat. They're saying, look, our sales are going up. And then when you zoom out, you're like, oh, wait a minute, actually, they're a lot flatter than that. That's visualization bias. Don't be fooled because of how people draw things. Okay. Anyway, so let's identify total cost. We use average total cost for that. And the average total cost of Q4 units, we go straight up to, almost straight up, to that average total cost curve. And that takes us to this point here. And that's ATC4 for case 4. So total cost is going to be this red box. And clearly we're losing money. And so we've shown this part of it. We have a loss. We need to show that we should shut down. How do we show that? We need to show that the revenue does not cover what? Does not cover your variable costs. Right, that's what we need to show. Okay, so how do we find variable costs? Remember last time we used the vertical lines. We could put T for total variable costs. Well, we're going to use the same trick as we did before. Take your quantity, go straight up to your average variable cost curve. That identifies your average variable cost of producing Q4 units. AVC times Q is variable cost, total variable cost, and we get this blue box. Notice, here we go. Here's the contradiction. Well, the contradiction we already did. Here's the reason we shouldn't be producing. Why? Because the revenue coming in, the green, does not cover the variable costs, the blue, the costs we can eliminate by shutting down. Right? Bad idea. That alone right there. Why should you not produce? Because green doesn't cover blue. That's why you shouldn't produce. And what did you do? Had you not produced, what would your loss have been? Your loss would have been, let me pick red. No, pink. Your loss would have been what? Just the fixed cost, right? If you didn't produce. And if the blue is your variable cost, then that means your fixed cost is this up here. Right? That would have been your loss if you didn't produce. But you produced. So not only did you lose that pink jaggedy box there, but you also lost money on the variable input there, right there. So you just made your loss bigger. You took a loss on the variable input. Your variable cost exceeded your revenue. You took a loss on the variable cost. You just made your loss bigger. You grabbed that gun and you shot yourself in the foot. Bad idea. Do not produce. Right? If you don't produce, then your loss is just that part up there. So again, proof by contradiction. We contradicted that we should be shutting down by producing, and we just showed that we made ourselves worse off. Case 4. Right. So again, case 3 and case 4 are the harder ones, I think. Okay. I have 2 more plots to show you, and then a story, and we're done after that. Basically, the next plot is going to be a summary of all the 4 cases, and it's basically going to identify the supply curve for the firm in the short run and the long run. So it's going to be just a summary of everything else of the 4 cases. So again, this is the firm. So that's why I'm using little q. And here's our cost curves. Here is the average total cost curve intersecting marginal cost at its minimum. Here's the average variable cost curve that I drew poorly. That's a little better. Okay, there we go. And let's summarize what we've been doing so far. I'm going to say if price is here, then dot, dot, dot. Okay. So let's identify these thresholds. We've identified this one, minimum ATC, ATC min. We've identified this one, a VC min. And we covered in case 1, hello, we showed that if price is above AVC min, if price was up here, then the firm is profiting. And if it's profiting, then it should absolutely produce. Absolutely. All right, profits are greater than 0, produce. And if we're here, we know profits are equal to 0, and you should still produce. Think about revenue covering all of your variable costs. And then there's being some left over to help you pay off all of your fixed costs, so then you're breaking even. Okay. All right, so profit equals 0, but produce. Then if price fell below ATC min, that's when we went into loss territory, which is why we call this threshold, we call it the break-even price. Oh, that was interesting. Break-even price. Break-even price. Right? That identifies the threshold at which if price is above it, we're profiting. If price is below it, we're getting a loss. And if price is at it, we're breaking even. So if price is below here, but still above ABC, then the firm is losing money, but it should operate. So I'm going to write but operate, produce. Do not shut down. If you're at it, technically you're indifferent between shutting down and not shutting down. That's a special case. We're not going to focus on that one, although we do focus on the break even. We're not going to focus on this special case where it's there. We're just going to say, hey, actually that's the threshold that helps us identify whether or not we should shut down. Right? So we call this the shutdown price. By the way, I want to emphasize something again that I've already talked about before, but I'm going to emphasize it again. That the short run is different from the long run. In the short run, you would shut down. Shutting down is a short run phenomenon. You're not producing. That's what shutdown is. You closed your door, but you still have the fixed costs. You still owe the rent. You still have the keys to the building. Shutdown is a short run phenomenon. Exit is long run. You cannot exit until you get out of that fixed obligation. Shutting down is not the same thing as exiting. Shutting down simply means quantity equals 0. You don't produce. That's what shutdown means. Exit means you're like, goodbye. My lease is up. I'm turning in my keys. Right? You're out of your fixed obligation. Of course, I've been assuming all along that the fixed input is the building. It doesn't have to be. But it's just to get this point across because we'll all understand that. So shutdown is not the same thing as exiting. Okay. All right. What else do I want to say? So that's our shutdown price, the threshold that tells us if price is above it but below ATC, then we're losing but producing. But if price falls below this threshold, then bad idea to produce. We have negative profits and we should shut down. Close your door. Do not produce. Why? Because the money coming in, the total revenue is not enough to cover your variable costs, the costs you can eliminate by shutting down. So with this in mind, let's ask ourselves, what would you want to do in the short run? Remember, the short run, you're still fixed. Something's still fixed, at least one input, in our case, the building. So in the short run, do you want to profit? If price is above greater than ATC, do you want to produce? Yeah. You're going to be like, yep, I'll produce. If price is here, you produce here. If price is there, you produce there. If price is there, wherever price is, that determines where you're going to produce, right? So we're going to basically trace that entire marginal cost curve as being, I'll do lines like this, as being our supply curve. You're going to say, hell yeah, I'll supply. It depends where price is. If price is here, I'll supply there, right? Because price is marginal revenue because marginal cost is the optimal output rule. So trace along this marginal cost curve. That's where you want to be in the short run. And even if you're breaking even, if you're in the short run, you're going to do it. You're going to produce because that revenue is going to pay off that variable cost. And then what's left over is going to pay off all of your fixed costs, the costs you can't avoid. And then, ooh, whoa, 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 whoa. Did I say whoa enough? Whoa, 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 whoa. You would produce. Okay, this is not a mistake. This is a teachable moment. You would produce at a loss. If price is here, you would say, yes, I'll produce. I'm losing money. But marginal revenue equals marginal cost there. I'm losing money, but my revenue can cover my variable costs. So you would produce all along here. Depends on where price is, so that's why we're tracing this. You would produce based on the price. You would choose your quantity supplied. But once price gets to this point here, I'll put a dash. I don't want to put a dot. Then you're like, no, you're indifferent technically here between shutting down and not shutting down if the price is there because it's exactly equal your revenue to your variable costs. But if price falls below this threshold, you are not going to produce. You're going to be at 0. So this pink weird looking shape, line, whatever, is our supply curve in the short run. The firm's supply curve in the short run is the pink one going like that. If price is above, over here, produce. If it's down here, shut down. And again, this is a short run phenomenon. But in the long run, ladies and gentlemen, in the long run, do you ever want to make losses in the long run? Remember, in the long run, you can leave because you're out of your fixed obligation. Do you want to lose money? Absolutely not. So in the long run, you'll want to profit. Sure, you'll produce up here, but you're going to stop. Right here, you're technically indifferent because revenue equals cost, total cost. But then if price falls below here, you're going to 0. Right? So the supply curve in the long run is the green one, or the line that says ruin. The long run, or the line's going like this. That's the supply curve in the long run. Technically, it's really just this part right here, right there. And for the short run, it's really that part right there, right? Because after that, you basically are indifferent or you go to 0. Anyway, this is a summary of the 4 cases, and this is what the textbook distinguishes between the short run and the long run supply curves for the firm. So that was one of the 2 plots I still wanted to cover. Finally, the last thing I want to cover here in terms of graphs is what we call, or what I call, market dynamics. Changes in the market. Okay. And so, let's start with either the firm losing money or profiting. It doesn't matter which one. Let's talk about profits. Okay. I could do losses as well. It would just go in the opposite direction of what I'm doing here, but the economic intuition still follows, and you should be able to do it. After you sit through this profit story, you should be able to think, oh, if it's losses, this is where price would be, and oh, this is what would happen. Okay. So sit back and listen for a while. All right, we're going to look at the firm on the left and the market on the right. They're different. Right? The market's the big one. The firm is the individual firm. And let's start with the firm making positive economic profits. By the way, dynamics means changes, right? So again, dynamics means changes, right? Dynamic. So market changes. And so let's start by assuming that the firm is making a positive economic profit. So let's draw that. Little q, $, marginal cost. I'm only going to draw the average total cost curve since if the firm is profiting, remember average variable cost doesn't really come into play. I mean, it exists, but it doesn't really have anything to say. And so I'm going to draw the average total cost curve. There we go. And we're going to say that price is up above here since the firm is making a profit. We'll call that P0 for the initial condition, which again is the marginal revenue for the firm and the demand. And where's that price coming from? It's coming from what's happening at the market level. So big Q, P, and then I just have to be careful with how I draw this. There's demand, market level demand. And this price, I'm kind of going to cheat and draw the supply curve there. This price is coming from the intersection of supply and demand. If you hear that noise, it's my Jack Russell trying to dig for bones on my couch. Okay, so this price is coming from what's happening at the market level. And of course, market level quantity would be here. All right, so we can call that Q star naught. And then the firm, what's it doing? It's optimizing by choosing where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this is how much an individual firm would be producing. Okay. And we call this firm the representative firm, also known as the representative agent, because basically in competitive conditions, firms are pretty similar. And economists don't see firms, like compare firms in terms of, say, how flashy their advertising is or what their logo is. That's not how we distinguish between firms. How we distinguish between firms are their costs of production. Are they high-cost producers? Are their curves up here? Are they low-cost producers? Are their curves down here? That's how we characterize firms, by saying, oh, that's a high-cost producer, that's a low-cost producer. So under competitive conditions, we say that this firm right here is the representative agent. It represents other firms because other firms are very similar to it, because the only way you're going to survive under cutthroat competition or competitive conditions is if you're all basically low-cost. Okay. So that's why it's kind of a realistic assumption to assume, hey, this is the representative agent, the representative firm. Okay, so if firms are making profits, what's going to happen? There are positive economic profits. Remember, there's free entry. Free entry means that the vultures that are at the margin thinking, ooh, we want in, they're going to be seeing profits, that the firms that are in the industry are making profits. So since there's nothing keeping them out, there's no major barrier to entry, what's that going to do? That's going to increase the supply of firms, right? It's going to increase the number of firms. And we know that's a supply shifter. So at the market level, little by little, there's going to be more firms, right? So we go from S to, say, S prime. And we'll call this entry. There's going to be entry at the market level. Little by little. One firm entering we won't notice, but when enough firms enter, it will influence the price, and the price will start dropping. It drops to P1 now. So then that puts us at a price down here. If I can draw a straight line, I'll try. There, which comes from there. The firms that are in the market, again, this is the representative agent, re-optimize and they produce less, which should make sense because there's more firms in the market. That means each individually are producing less. And at the market level, the price dropped. We have more output in aggregate, and you might be wondering, how the hell do we have more output when individual firms are producing less? How do we have more output at the market level? Well, that's because of entry, right? Entry is happening at a rate that is outpacing this contraction at the firm level in terms of output. And notice that profits are shrinking because that price is getting closer to that minimum ATC, but there are still profits. So entry will basically continue to happen up until we get to this point here. And I'm kind of going to cheat by drawing that line and then identifying it here. So entry is going to continue to happen. That's my attempt at a supply curve. Terrible. Entry is going to continue to happen until we get basically to this point. Right, so it's not necessarily going to happen in 2 or 3 or 4 stages. Who knows how many stages? But it's going to continue to happen so long as there are profits at the firm level because the vultures want in. The vultures are going to say, we're coming in, and this is them coming, the rightward shift of the supply curve going from S to S prime to S, ultimately double prime in my little story here. And then once the price gets, it was here at P1 and then P2, we'll just call it that. The firms that are in the industry are producing Q star 2, and now they're breaking even. There's no further reason for there to be entry, right? The market is now at long run equilibrium. So what happens is that these profits, because of free entry, it led to firms entering, which means it increased the supply curve at the market level. And what did that do? That dropped the price. And when the price dropped, that means profits were driven down to zero. Economic profits. So this is what happens. This is a long run behavior. In the short run, yeah, you're profiting as a firm, but in the long run, this is going to happen. There's going to be entry, and entry drives profits down to zero, right? These are, again, changes in the market. So it's not profitable in the long run to be in highly competitive markets, which once again is why if you're going to enter a competitive industry, you better try damn hard to try to make it a little less competitive. Whether it means you're going to make your good a little bit different, or whether it means you're going to try to get a bigger market share to keep them, make it difficult for them to get your market share. Okay, whatever. Just make it different somehow. Okay. All right. I am going to end now with a story, a real life story of a firm in Santa Barbara. And so let me go to the news. Actually, we're going to go to the Santa Barbara Independent, and it's going to connect all of these concepts, or at least the cases that we've been talking about. So economics, right? It's all around us. We were talking about earlier how you're sitting in a restaurant and you're thinking about, hey, it's just me, or just you, you're the only one there, and you're wondering why in the world is the business still open? Case 3, right? So now we understand why firms that are losing money keep their doors open, because sometimes it's the best thing for them to do. They're minimizing their losses. And so hopefully understanding the stuff we've talked about, I mean, you've learned a lot this term. We're not done yet, but you've learned a lot. We're done with the bulk of it. And hopefully now when you just look at businesses, you look at industry, you're able to see these things. Are they high cost? What are their variable costs? Like next time you go into, say, a Panda Express, look at their production, look at what they're doing, look at how many people they have operating at certain hours, right? At 11 a.m. versus 3 p.m. versus 7 p.m. right? Look at that. Look at who's working. Look at how many people are in line. That sort of thing. Think about what are their fixed costs, right? This helps us understand a lot of the things going on around us. Anyway, so I like this article here, because it really, in article form, it really has a lot of economics in it. You don't see it unless you've taken this class, but now that you've sat through this, it should make a lot of sense. So it's a little dated. It's not too old. It's from November of 2016. And if you're not from Santa Barbara, or if you are, you may not know of this restaurant anyway. It did close back in 2016. So Julienne Restaurant is closing. Celebrated chef Justin West shutting East Canon Perdido spot to focus on Wildwood. Wildwood is his other restaurant. So this is Justin West. Some of you may know him. It's a small town. So let me read this to you, and I'll show you what an economist sees when they read something like this. Or what they think. Chef Justin West Justin West announced on Tuesday that his highly praised restaurant, Julienne, will be closing on November 12th after 8 years in business. The farm-to-table, nose-to-tail establishment. What is that telling you? High cost, right? That's what an economist is seeing. When we see that, we're like, ding, 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 high cost. The farm-to-table, nose-to-tail establishment at the corner of East Canon Perdido and Santa Barbara, that's also another thing telling us high cost, quickly became the darling of Santa Barbara gourmet scene. Again, high cost. Right. Upon opening in 2008, even winning applause from celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain. That success spawned West's second restaurant, Wildwood, an upscale barbecue joint, again another high-cost one, on East Haley Street that opened at the end of 2015. Here we go. According to an email sent to his many fans, West, who explained that the restaurant has been for sale since April, what's that telling you? He's been trying to get out of his fixed cost, right? So he's owned it. He's trying to get out of his fixed cost, right? Of course he is, because that means his revenue, it must be the case that he was losing money, because if it was profitable, he wouldn't be shutting it down, right? Listen to the rest. Has been for sale since April, is closing Julienne to focus on Wildwood and his family. And I'm an economist, right? When you see that, I'm like, I'm sure he cares about his other restaurant, and I'm most certainly, absolutely, 100% convinced he cares about his family. But if Julienne were profitable, don't you think that he'd keep it open because that helps his family? Right? So when an economist sees something like this, we're thinking, yeah, no, right? If we really think about the economic forces behind this, yeah, if it were profitable, he would have hired other people to manage it. If he does want to focus on Wildwood, he would have hired other people to manage it in order to get the profits from that, because that ultimately helps him with his family and can help him also with Wildwood. Right? So this is again the things that we see, like you kind of see the economic forces behind it. And he himself, I'm not saying he's lying, he's probably not. But if you think about it, it is economic forces that he's like, oh yeah, that's not worth it. So I'd rather walk away from that stress and go focus on my family and Wildwood. Versus again, if it were super profitable, it would help Wildwood and his family. Right? So again, when an economist sees articles, these are the things we're seeing, right? Behind the scenes or in between all of these lines, there are economic forces. Economic forces are all around us, folks. All around us. And we just have to look for them. We just have to understand these concepts. All right, that is chapter 14. We are nearly done. Chapter 15 is next, so make sure you read through that chapter, and then that video will be available for you to sit through. But again, always read before you watch the videos. Almost done, folks.